Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. Learn more at alumni.psu.edu. And from viewers like you, thank you.
Hi, I'm Robert Johnson. A free and independent press is vital to a healthy democracy, and popular trust in the press is just as necessary. The rise of fake news has threatened to undermine that trust and seeks to delegitimize news organizations. But what is fake news? Why is it so dangerous? And what does its rise in the wake of the 2016 presidential election mean for America? On this episode of Digging Deeper, Penn State President Eric Barron talks to Dr. Denise Boitry, director of the Arthur W. Page Center for Integrity and Communications, and Dr. Russell Frank, associate professor of communications and a former newspaper reporter and editor.
Well, thank you for joining me. Such a fascinating topic here today. I'm willing to bet that there's no American, and maybe a huge percentage of the world, who hears and knows fake news. What does fake news actually mean?
That's a good question. Yeah. And I think there are a couple different definitions of fake news, or different ways the term is used. I think the traditional way, and the way we think about it when we think about news, we think about something that is fake but appears to be news. So you think of, something like a gem. A diamond, a fake diamond. It appears to be a diamond. It has characteristics of a diamond, but it's lacking something, right?
Yeah.
So we think about fake news as something that people observe and think is news, accept as credible news, but it's not. It's been created for another reason. The other way that fake news
is this a key part of it, created for another reason? That it's driven by something?
Oftentimes it is, yeah. I don't think that accidents, mistakes are considered fake news. If somebody reports something genuinely believing it to be true, a reporter who has gone through the process of vetting news, and there's some misinformation. But I think the intentional misinformation is a key part of fake news.
Fake news. So if I'm portraying a story and I only have part of the story, and I have a natural tendency maybe to sensationalize it a little bit because I'm trying to get hits for my program.
Yeah.
And so I'm pushing a particular, that's not fake news because that's the knowledge that they have at that particular moment.
I would not agree with that necessarily.
You would also say that was fake news.
I would, yes. Yeah, because I think we think of news as something that's objective, that's been vetted by sources. If we're talking about journalism, we're talking about something that's reported and is supposed to present both sides of the story.
Yeah.
So I think when somebody is only presenting one side of the story, it might be true, but it's not news.
Okay.
Although, one of the things that's happening in the age of internet journalism is you're reporting as you find out about things with the understanding that you're going to update it throughout the day. So this is what we know so far. So you're trafficking in kind of incomplete stories, which we never used to do in the days of print journalism.
But we're in a hurry now.
Yeah.
Because we've got a lot of competition there in social media and other things, so we're in a hurry.
Yeah. And with all the problems attendant on that, which is things don't get edited as carefully, perhaps. There are mistakes that creep in. If you're sent out on an assignment in the morning and you've got all day to do the reporting and then all evening to do the editing, the chances of introducing error are much less than if you're just hurrying stuff onto your website as you're finding out about it.
So in my own discipline, in meteorology, we had a case study about sweeps week in the Northeast, and there was a 10% chance of an incredible storm hitting Philadelphia, New York City, and Connecticut. All the meteorologists and the TV stations were saying, we have to downplay this. It's a 10-15% chance. One of the stations said, no, we've got to talk about this. This could be the storm of the century. So they did a storm of the century over the objection of the meteorologist. And everybody else along the line said, we can't let them do this story. So the state of Connecticut shut down the highways, and it didn't even snow.
Wow. Yeah.
Fake news?
Clearly misinformation.
Misinformation,
and it
but
depends
not
if
necessarily.
they said 10% chance,
Yeah.
then they were, then
They weren't
speaking
saying
the
10%
truth.
chance.
If
They
weren't
were
saying
saying,
10%
look out,
chance,
enough so
then-
that the state. So, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where the lines get blurry too,
They-
because you have, when you start to sort of hype the news or sensationalize the news, is that fake news? I mean, I would say not strictly speaking, which doesn't make it okay.
Right.
I mean, it's still, ethically, there's still a problem there.
So the ethical problem is I'm trying to get hits here, so I stretch a little bit,
Yeah.
but not quite fake news.
Yeah. But
Okay,
which
now
is an ethical problem.
let's take another example. We'll go back to the time of William Randolph Hearst and yellow journalism.
Yeah.
Fake news?
Definitely. Yeah.
Definitely fake news.
Yeah.
Allegedly.
Yeah, I mean, there was no, he didn't even sort of try to disguise his purposes. He was trying to boost circulation by increasing readership, by whipping up sort of pro-war hysteria.
And he was also trying to promote a particular political agenda, if I realize.
Yeah.
I remember right.
Yeah. I mean, one point that's really worth making here is just that there's nothing new about the phenomenon, and there's nothing new about the term fake news. The people have used that term for the past 100 years.
People have used the term fake news
Yeah,
for
so
more than 100 years.
Our colleague Matt Jordan did a nice piece about this in The Conversation, where he was tracing the history of the use of the term. And back then, too, it was used in two different ways. One, by politicians, kind of the way it is now, who were just unhappy with the news coverage they were getting and claiming that they were the victims of fake news. But also, as in the Hearst case, journalists trafficking in fake news as a circulation booster. So you see both those things, which you also see now.
So it's been around for a very long time. The landscape's changing. Maybe the landscape's changing because of social media and speed and because of political polarity.
I think a big difference is what's been routine is for politicians to say they were misquoted or to say that what they said was taken out of context.
Yeah.
And so to say the entire story is fake news is just kind of, it's sort of on that same continuum, but it's just taking it one step further. Like the whole story is bogus. But politicians complaining about the way they're covered, I mean, that goes, even Thomas Jefferson, who we think of as the great defender of the freedom of the press in America,
would complained
about the news coverage and say that some of the stories, he didn't use the term fake news, but in essence, that's what he was saying.
So then this also can take what I would personally say was a darker turn, and election interference and the Russians, and basically planting stories, even collecting data on individuals and what they like, and what threads that they could pull, and essentially purchasing information about people, and then setting them up with particular information to try to get them upset, to try to get them to vote in a particular way, to try. So is this now a more profound moment in the history of fake news because of the knowledge we have about individuals and what may appeal to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that we saw in the 2016 election, we saw that that there were a lot of stories that were driven politically, fake news, but there were a lot that were, driven financially too. A lot of people who were creating fake news were making money off of the sites, the fake news sites. But I think that, we see the bots that were sharing fake news, and I think one of the misunderstandings is that not all that was happening around the 2016 election was politically motivated, but there was quite a bit of that. People using tools that were intended for advertising to target individuals, they were using it to target fake news messages. But I think the bigger picture was the question of why people read fake news, why they were even seeking it out during the election.
Yeah.
And I think there was a lot of uncertainty, and that created this environment where people were looking for information.
Looking more and more. You're Googling, you're searching, you're doing this, and so then all of a sudden you get caught up in this, and more is coming your way. Explain. I think a lot of people will sit there and go, well, of course, somebody wants to steer an election in a particular way, and they start setting up the stories and the controversy and getting people excited or maybe riled enough to vote. but explain in that environment the people that were working to make money. How does that work?
Yeah. Exactly. We heard about these, fake news farms in Macedonia and whatnot. And the way it works is that they would set up websites that had fake news stories on them.
Right.
And then they would, share in social media for the most part. And if someone visited the website, there's advertising on the site. And for every click, every time somebody landed on one of those sites, the authors would get paid. And so they were playing on sort of the angst, the political tension that was happening during the election, and they knew people were looking for information. They were uncertain. They wanted to be sure that their candidate was maybe the better candidate or not as bad of a candidate as the other one, so they were seeking information. And they were creating these websites with misinformation, and people wanted to see it. Yeah, and the more hits that they got.
Because the advertising is going up right next to it.
Right next to it.
So I remember, again, as sort of a personal story, as a president with conference realignment for football and, teams trading places, and that I started to pay a lot of attention to the blogs and things out there because you're always worried that some other school in your conference would jump ship and you would be left alone or something like this would occur. So I started to read a lot of these, and I would read one that say, well, this guy in West Virginia, he seems to know it all. He really does. He predicted this, this, and this. And then I'm going along and I'm looking at another story about whether this school is switching or something, and here's this guy in West Virginia. And all of a sudden I realized the guy in West Virginia was posting all over the place what was going on, and that he was a good predictor. And I don't even think he was a good predictor, but he was just making money. That's the idea here, right?
Exactly.
So a kind of...
But the conditions that make all that possible, part of it is less trust in the mainstream or legacy media, and journalism did not help itself with all those big sort of fabrication scandals that happened right around the turn of the 21st century with Jason Blair at the New York Times and somebody at USA Today, somebody at the Boston Globe. And so here are reporters getting caught making stories up, and you go, aha, you see, confirmation that you can't trust those guys.
Bias.
In conjunction with the sense that maybe sometimes like big journalism is just sort of too slow and clunky, too sort of wedded to 20th century ways of doing things, and that people who have their own blogs and websites are more nimble and they can traffic in information faster. So all these things are causing people to sort of look elsewhere instead of automatically going to the old reliables.
Yeah. So how do we fix that? It seems to me that if we really get to the point where we don't trust the media and what we're reading, and we're susceptible to taking something that is some idea that somebody is working through, and that starts to have appeal to us because we think there's something deeper or darker going on, and I don't know what part of that appeals to us, but this could be a profound problem for democracy in general if we can't have faith. What do we do? What do we do about that?
Right. I think it's complex. You identified a lot of different things. Trust in media is one of them. But I think just starting with the social media companies and their need to get ahead of this and to identify ways to limit the spread of fake news. And we've seen that recently. I run a center in the Belisario College of Communications Research Center, and we funded 11 studies on fake news last year. And one of them looked at the way fake news travels in social media, like the patterns of it, and identifying those. And companies like Facebook and Twitter, they have access to that and would be able to shut that kind of thing down.
Know
so
it.
I think they do. I mean, and they're learning it for sure.
So they know it, they're learning it, but they're making money doing it.
Yeah,
allowing it.
Right, but I think the backlash has become so large, that I think they are having to do something about it, and they're trying. They've tried a couple different things.
I hear occasionally students say to me, "You know what? I'm off Facebook. I am not going to have somebody basically using me and my personal information. I thought this was my friends and I having a way to, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to cut." So
absolutely,
that's the type of pressure that they all of a sudden would realize, that protecting people's privacy and
Yeah.
not selling you to
Right.
some bidder.
I mean, one
Yeah.
of the things that concerns me is that you're asking so much of the consumer to be well informed. It's like you have to spend the time
Yeah.
to do what, in essence, what journalists do, which is sort of
Yeah.
corroborate. And it's like, who, realistically, who's going to spend that big of a chunk of their day making sure that, so verifying, making sure that the stories that they're paying attention to are really true. Because, how would you do that? You would sort of go to multiple sources of news and see if they're all reporting it, and that would
Yeah.
be one thing. Look at sort of also, so there's sort of corroboration from one news organization to another, and then there's also the kind of corroboration within stories, like, who are the sources that the reporter is using for this information? Are those reliable sources?
Right.
Is the information coming from multiple sources? That all takes work. And so this is where I feel a little bit stumped by this. It's like, we're going to ask people to spend 2 or 3 hours of their morning, playing detective on the news every day. It's like, that doesn't seem realistic,
Yeah. So, but you called mainstream media kind of clunky in this process, as it makes me think of, when the music giants were forcing you to buy whole albums when you just wanted to be, get a particular song, and it became very disruptive, and off you go with a completely different world these days. Is mainstream media going through that same disruption that's going to have, and part of it is this issue?
I mean, they're still trying to figure out how to fund themselves
Yeah.
in the age of declining advertising revenue and declining circulation. But at the same time, those people remain our best sources. And, does the New York Times make mistakes? Of course it does. Have there been errors
Nobody's
of judgment?
perfect.
Have they
Yeah.
had blind spots? All those
Yeah.
things are true. But day in and day out. I mean, the thing is, when these traditional news organizations, when they report on a hurricane, nobody says, "Oh, it's fake news. There's not really a
Right.
hurricane."
Yeah.
Right.
So when you look at people calling them out for fake news, I mean, notice how selectively they're doing that. It's only if it's a story that makes me look bad, it's fake news. Otherwise, we believe it. And so you have to really be suspicious of politicians' use of that term.
So let's get your thoughts on that. We do see fake news also becoming synonymous with "I don't like that news."
Yeah.
So how, and it seems to me that a lot of people believe this.
Well, it's scary. I noticed during this past political campaign season that has kind of trickled down from the White House, so that on very local levels, people campaigning for office were accusing their local newspapers of purveying fake news because they didn't like the coverage they were getting. So that's become this kind of all-purpose shield when you're unhappy with any negativity in the coverage.
How do you police that?
Yeah, you
it's
you
all the
count
way
on
from
people
national
to
news
be
to
savvy.
local news.
I mean, you hate to say don't trust politicians, but really, if I'm going to make a choice between trusting journalists and trusting politicians, I'm going to pick the journalist every time. Journalists, in spite of all that people think about journalists, I mean, most of them, they're not ideologues. They don't go into journalism with this agenda of achieving this or that policy objective. I mean, they really, and I speak as someone who worked as a journalist, for a long time myself, and I've known, countless numbers of journalists. Why do we do journalism? We're curious about the world. We think it's important that people know what's going on in the world. And we kind of like having a front row seat at the exciting things that are going on in the world. I mean, that's what motivates us, not trying to steer the news, and this doesn't mean that bias doesn't exist, but that's sort of, again, it's a separate conversation about it, because that has to do with sort of how the story was covered, not whether or not the story is true. Because you can always argue about why did the journalist interview this person instead of that person, or use this quote instead of that quote? Why was the story on page 27 instead of on page 1? I mean, there are all these decisions, right? And there's an element of subjectivity that goes into all these decisions. But again, that's not the same thing as just making the stuff
So
up.
do you think that then we're going to overdo it? To have politicians constantly saying anything they don't like is fake news, that all of a sudden people will look at that as just the latest mantra from a politician in order to...
For a long
and so
time.
this may fall flat on its face after a while.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, though, it's been a maddeningly effective strategy. You'd like to see people wise up about that.
You know, I want to go back to one thing that you said, which must be interesting. You said you funded this group of studies so that you could see the path that the news, fake news, took through social media. So what's an example of a path?
The path of fake news. So what the study did, and we funded 11 different studies. This was just one of the studies. So they did other things. But in this study, they looked at who shares fake news. Like, where does it originate? How does it reach audiences? So when you think about, if you see a post in Twitter and it's been shared 10,000 times, you think, oh, 10,000 people have read this and and have shared it because they thought it was important. Well, that's not necessarily true for fake news, but you don't know that as a consumer. But and then there's another story that's real news, and 10,000 people have read it and shared it. So as a consumer, you can't always tell if something's fake news, but Twitter and Facebook know the path. They can see where it started, where it originated, how it spread across
among communities and places.
Exactly, and ended up in your news feed. So they can identify those patterns.
Well, this is just a really interesting topic, and I think I've been paying attention, and I'm going to work hard to pay even more attention as how all of this evolves. So can I just ask one last question? Is all of this ending up in the classroom for a Penn State student studying communications?
One of the 11 studies that we funded was on education, and because we think it's really important that people who will be communicators, students, understand what fake news is, they can identify it, they're not contributing to it, but they also, if you think about communication, they're getting information, so sometimes they're fooled by other information, so being able to identify what is fake news and know how to use information. So we're looking at that and finding gaps, and yes, the goal is for us to develop curriculum that can help fill that gap and prepare students.
I think this crosses so many disciplines. Where you're looking for information, it's so easy to get it. How do you know it's credible science information? Is it just because it looks good, it sounds good, or is there some way to tell? Well, thank you so much for joining me. Fascinating topic. Must be fun to both teach and do research in this area for sure. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Dr. Barron, a hot topic that we just talked about, fake news. People have been talking about it for quite some time now. And you personally, you deal with the media quite a bit. How would you describe the competency and fairness of major news outlets in the country?
Yeah, you know, I always worry about it. And as you said, a fair amount of connections there. And there are many times that I will go, well, why did you say it that way? You know, this is the way I see it. And you can't always have the world just bend to what you think is the right way to do it. But I'm a consumer of major media outlets, and I do think it's the best place to get information that we have. And I think it's very important to be informed and weigh different issues and understanding not just what people are saying, but the evolution of what people are saying.
And you talked during the conversation about not only what fake news is, but how some people view fake news as being synonymous with, I don't like that news. And for a lot of students, particularly the journalism students, how do you think they should go about those waters and navigate their reporting, and how to do that fairly and accurately, and even how to respond to people who don't agree with their reporting, even if it is true?
Right. Well, I really think that notion that most people that are going into journalism are not going to steer a conversation. They're not going to sit there and say, okay, this is my chance to put something out there that people will listen to that will get them to do this. I do think that they go into it from the viewpoint of how is it that I can provide information in a way that attracts listeners and it is fair and is balanced. So I think that's the attitude, and I think our educational system has to make sure that we're always working that angle. I actually think the more profound thing is, in every discipline, how do students trust what it is they read? Look at how they get information. How do they trust what it is that they read? because people are putting all sorts of things out there, and they may all look beautiful. How do you know that on this scientific issue, or or any kind of political issue, just the whole gamut, how do you know what you're reading is factual? That's a tough thing, and I don't think we worried about it 2 decades ago, and I think we should really worry about it now.
One final thing, where would you like to see the future of journalism go? You talked about that for Penn Staters, but also, how would you like to see us progress?
So there are many, many times when I look at topics and I realize that it's the intersection between a field and other fields that makes the difference. So I'm a journalism student, and I'm interested in health issues, but I'm not a medical doctor. How do you intersect communications with health? Here's all this discussion, say if we took an example of natural gas and fracking, wide range of opinions. And I'm a journalism student, and I'm excellent at communicating. How is it that I have the knowledge base that allows me to tackle that particular issue? So I think part of the future is the intersection between journalism and all these other disciplines that are the holders of the information. And if you can make that marriage work well, I think we'll see great things.
Thank you, Dr. Barron.
Thank you.
Support for Digging Deeper comes from the Penn State Alumni Association, connecting alumni to the university and to each other. The Alumni Association is powered by pride. Learn more at alumni.psu.edu. And from viewers like you, thank you.